KRQE News 13 investigative reporter Gabrielle Burkhart joins me here in the KRQE News 13 digital studio talking about her latest investigation. This is involving a police traffic stop with an Alamogordo firefighter and also Otero County Sheriff's deputies. Gabby, thanks for joining us here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and if for folks who have not had a chance to check out the story online here, we're going to give you a little preview of kind of what it looks like online. Right now, titled New Mexico Firefighter Threatens to Sue Over a DWI Arrest. You can see the whole text of the article and whatnot, and of course the video soon will be posted there. There's also a few legal documents there as well as extras you can check out in the story. So, Gabby, I guess the first thing I wanted to get into with this particular story is asking, for those who have not watched it, if you could just give us a very brief summary. What is the story about? What happened?
Yeah, so, this story came about because I received an email asking to take a look into this case, which is often how we hear about stories. Viewers send in emailed tips. And we had actually received more than one tip about this particular firefighter in Alamogordo. So I requested public records. We received lapel video and dash cam video kind of showing what went down, what led up to the traffic stop, what took place during the traffic stop involving the deputy and the firefighter, and then what later happened in the holding cell where there's some, words being shouted and slurs happening at that moment, and then there were court records filed. So I requested, I looked up the court records to check the status of the case. In February of this year, the DWI charge was dismissed there in Otero County, and actually the firefighter is now threatening to sue the sheriff's office in Otero County over this whole arrest.
As we take a look at some of this video in the middle of the screen, sort of showing how this unfolded, and I know you have covered a few of these points already, but that night, this was a December night in 2020, kind of on the north edge of the city of Alamogordo. How did this unfold? The deputy stopped him again for what reason?
Yeah, so obviously we can't play the entirety of the videos on air, but there were three three videos, including dash camera footage from each deputy. So there were two deputies actually on scene. You'll see in Otero County Sheriff's Deputy De La Cruz's vehicle, in his initial dash cam video, you can see that he pulls over this truck pulling a trailer with a Polaris, which is like an ATV, right, attached to it. It's about 3:30 in the morning, on a cold night in December. They pull into a McDonald's parking lot. It's very cordial interaction at first. The deputy asks him, "How's it going?" Tyler Bass responds, "Good." Then he explains, "Your tail lamps aren't working." And then things kind of go from there. The driver, Tyler Bass, the firefighter, wants to check them. The deputy wants to know if he'd been drinking. They start field sobriety tests, and then things just unravel for there. And there are claims later made from Tyler that he alleges this deputy actually knows him from a previous relationship. And therefore, Tyler claims he does not really trust the intent of this deputy's stop or the field sobriety tests.
Interesting. So along those lines, you had a chance to look into this whole thing. The interesting part I think about this case is that you have this DWI stop. You have, as you had mentioned, this interaction between the subject who's been stopped and the deputy, sort of raising a point that there may be some level of a bias here, I suppose, is the allegation. The case was eventually dropped in, quote, the interest of justice. The prosecutor tells you there's a lack of evidence. And again, we know that there's this claim of some sort of connection between the two. So I guess just to basically lay it out very cleanly to ask you, did anything wrong happen here?
Well, we kind of leave that up for the viewer to decide. You can see how things unfold. Initially, during the traffic stop, Tyler Bass and Deputy De La Cruz do not acknowledge or appear to acknowledge that they knew each other. And then during the field sobriety tests, Tyler Bass turns to that second deputy, asks him to observe those field sobriety tests because he says, "Hey, this deputy had a previous relationship, basically, in so many words, with Tyler's fiance. So that is his claim. He claims, through his attorney, that Deputy De La Cruz did indeed know who he was. However, I asked the sheriff's office, did Deputy De La Cruz know Tyler Bass? And they told me through their preliminary inquiry that the deputy did not know who Tyler was until later on in the holding cell, where he started making more claims and said that, he knew the deputy through photos and things of that sort. So during that whole traffic stop, the sheriff's office and Deputy De La Cruz maintained that the deputy did not know who Tyler was, had not met him before. But, again, Tyler claims the opposite, says he knew exactly who he was. So it is kind of, one person says this, another person says this. However, legally, the issue with the DWI is, and I'm hearing from the DA's office, the reason why it was dismissed and can't be prosecuted is because of a lack of evidence. You can sort of see them lose patience with one another during those field sobriety tests. Right. And at one point, Deputy De La Cruz just gets frustrated and says, you know what, you're under arrest, puts him in cuffs, asks if he wants to take a breathalyzer. The deputy declines the breathalyzer. So without the results of a breath test or the final results really of field sobriety tests, the prosecutor in Otero County just told me, we don't have enough evidence to prosecute a DWI, even if he were impaired while driving. They just don't have that evidence.
Interesting. I know that there's a lot of layers of investigations that happen. You talk about the criminal investigation initially from Otero County Sheriff's Office on the night of the stop. That, of course, goes to the DA. They do their own type of investigating with evidence at hand. The Sheriff's Office as well kind of looks into the stop administratively to see if anything happened here of note. I know you asked them about their sort of look into what happened that night. Did the Otero County Sheriff's Department have any reaction or response to what took place?
Well, they wouldn't comment on the record due to pending litigation, which is often what happens. Basically, Tyler's attorney filed a tort claim, which is an intent to possibly file a lawsuit with Otero County over this arrest. So Otero County and the sheriff's office there told me, we really can't comment due to this pending litigation. However, they did address my basic question of, did the deputy know Tyler Bass? And they said that their preliminary inquiry showed that no, the deputy did not know this firefighter at the time.
Okay.
So that's kind of what their response was. And I also reached out to the Alamogordo Fire Department, who employs Tyler Bass. He's been with that department since 2018, from what I could tell from records. And they're in Alamogordo, they referred me to their city attorney, who tells me they won't comment on personnel matters. So you get a lot of these sort of responses where it involves personnel and, potentially internal matters. And these particular agencies declined to comment on camera for our report. But we do know that Deputy De La Cruz is still with Otero County in the Sheriff's Department, and Tyler Bass is still employed with the Alamogordo Fire Department.
Did Mr. Bass speak to you?
He did not. I spoke with his attorney. She provided a statement on behalf of Tyler that you can see in our report there at the bottom. But basically, the gist of their statement is that Tyler claims this deputy absolutely knew who he was through this, relationship that he had with Tyler's fiance previously.
Interesting. Well, the question I had of course, it's centered to the headline that you have on the web article is this lawsuit a tort claim. It's an intent to file a lawsuit, but can you give us just a sort of status update? What has happened with this tort claim? What's maybe next?
Well, what could happen next, and what we often see with law enforcement agencies, is if somebody in a law enforcement agency or a municipality gets sued, we could see a settlement, which would cost Otero County, financially. Right. And then those municipalities really have to weigh that financial situation. Is it worth fighting in court a civil case like that? Even if there were to be a settlement and Otero County were to, hypothetically pay out some money in that settlement, It doesn't necessarily mean that either party would admit to wrongdoing, but it could, cost the county some money. And a lot of times, municipalities or law enforcement agencies weigh that risk cost assessment. Is it worth paying potentially more to fight an allegation or a civil claim in court, or to just settle something like that, financially? But either way, these are public employees, these are public funds. A lot of times, we hear a lot of stories about public officials getting in trouble for DWI or getting in trouble, just on the job. These folks, you know, sign codes of conduct. They're expected to present themselves in a certain manner in the public. And so that's kind of where this case stands. We could see a settlement. There has not been a formal lawsuit filed, but you can see that tort claim and read it, sort of see how this story unfolded in our online coverage.
Interesting. Well, and I take it that no repercussions that we know of have happened to either Mr. Bass or Deputy De La Cruz since this happened. But just to ask you to be clear, it doesn't sound like any repercussions have happened for their
Well,
jobs
I
as
did
public employees yet.
I did ask that. I requested Tyler Bass's employee file, which, if there were disciplinary records or anything in his written record, I assume they would have provided that to me in that public records request. So it does not appear, based on the records that I obtained, that he was disciplined over this DWI arrest at all. Now, that may not be the case, but if he was disciplined, I have no record of that, and the Alamogordo, the city of Alamogordo, and its attorney would not comment to me on that.
Right on. Well, Gabby, thank you so much for providing us with all of the background here on this story and this investigation. As you had mentioned, this came from a tip from a viewer. How can people get a hold of you if they want to suggest a new story to you?
Yeah, well, you can always email me. I'm at gabrielle.burkhart@krqe.com, or on Twitter at gburknm. The best way to reach me is through the written word. I will read your news tip, look into your situation, and see if it deserves any coverage.
Right on. Well, Gabby, thanks again for joining us here in the digital studio. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.